in the Swift Explorations Rock, Paper, Scissors app. We're going to pick back up on page 376. I encourage you to read the paragraphs that talk about how we're going to create the sign for the computer player that we will be playing against in our app, and how it uses the random method. On the next page, you can see that they provided you with that code, so we're going to follow the instructions for where we're supposed to place that. We are still in our sign.swift file. It says that we need to place it above our enum. So I will do a Command C to copy that code, come over to my Swift application and do a Command V. And you'll notice that when we do that, it provides us with the notations for where we copied that text from, so I will delete that out of the file, leaving only the code. You can now play a full game of rock, paper, scissors, but we still need to create the UI. So let's go over to the next page where it tells about how we need to do that. So the first thing it tells us on page 378 that we need to switch to the main storyboard. So now what I'm going to do here is, so we'll go back to our file navigation window, and I will choose main storyboard. So it says drag a button from the object library onto the scene and change the button's title to the fist. So we will do that. So I will go up under View, Show Library, and I want to drag a button. So I'm going to search for a button and then drag that onto my UI builder. So now we want to open up the utility menu. So now we want to open up the utility menu. Close that. And so now in the view controller, I can see where I have placed that button, and I'm going to continue to follow the instructions. So we want to use the fist. So let's remind ourselves we put that back in our Swift sign, how to bring up our emojis. We can bring up the emoji picker using Command Control Space. So we'll go back. Have to get my screen set up. So where it says button, I'm going to hit Command Control Space to bring up my emoji picture, and then I'm going to select my fist. And then the next thing it says to do is set the font size to 70. Duplicate the button twice. Set the titles to the correct emoji, the raised hand, and the victory. So I will So I will select my fist, go under Edit, and do a duplicate, which I can also see is a Command D. So then I want to bring up my emoji picker, Control Command Space, and this time I'm going to pick the raised hand. And then this time I'll use my keyboard, Command D, to duplicate that. Use my emoji picker, Control Command Space, and to get my victory, or for us, what's going to be our scissors emoji. Arrange the buttons in a horizontal line. And you can see that as we move these around, we get the blue placement lines that help us keep those in alignment. Drag another button underneath the 3 hand signs. This will be the Play Again button. So I'm going to go back to my library. I can't have that selected. I'm going to go back to my library, show library, and I want to bring up another button. There it is. It's already there, so I will just drag that to my view controller, and that is going to be the, so we're supposed to set the font. So first of all, I'm going to call this Play, oh, cap lock. First of all, I'm going to call this Play Again. Set its font to Title 1 in the Text Styles selection menu. So I'll click on the T to bring up my font menu, and I want to select Title 1. Drag the label, drag in a label above the 3 signs. So I'm going to go back to my library, and this time I'm going to, there's the label. Or if you need to, you can search for the label. I'm going to drag and drop that into my view controller. This will tell the user what's happening in the game. Make it the full width of the view and choose Title 1 for the font. So I'm going to click on the T again and choose Title 1. And they said, make it the full width of the view. Trying to get that one handle. Drag in another label above everything else. This will show the app's sign. It can't be clicked on any of my selected items that I already have out in my main storyboard view controller. But now I can go and get the library and drag out another label. The font of this label should be the same font used for the emoji buttons. So that was System, and it was size 70. I'm going to have to do a little bit of rearrangement here. I can select multiple items if I hold down my Shift button. Allows me to select multiple items, hold down the Shift, so that I can move those in unison so that they still keep their alignment. Both labels should have center aligned text. So I'll go back over to my utility menu and select center alignment, and also for this have center alignment. Show the assistant editor, then create outlets so that you can update the screen during play. The topmost label, which represents the app sign, the next label, which represents the status of the game, one for each of the player signs buttons, one for the play again button. Next, create actions to handle the button tabs. Okay, so we have some practice with this from other Okay, so let's work on making our Xcode environment conducive to making the connections. So we need to be able to both see our storyboard and our view controller. So I am going to go, and right below the utility menu, we can add an editor on the right. So I'm going to leave this be my main storyboard, and over in this other editor, I want to see the view controller. So normally I can just tab through my choices, but I guess I haven't clicked on that yet, so it's not available. So I'm going to go back over into my navigation panel and click on that view controller. So now we're going to make these connections. So we'll start with the topmost label. So now I have a split screen. So there's my topmost label. So I'm going to hold down the control key, click on the label, so I'm going to click on the label, and then while holding down on my control key on the keyboard, I'm going to drag so that I can make that connection. So I'll select the label, and then I'm going to hold down on my control key on my keyboard while I drag to make that connection. And I want to be under the class view controller definition and be above the override. And when I let go, then I can create that outlet. So I am going to give it a name of sign label and do a connection. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on the next item on our storyboard, hold down my control key, drag over to my view controller and release the control key. And I will call this status label. Now we're going to do one for each of our emoji buttons. Select that, hold down on the control key on my keyboard, click and drag, release, and I will call that my rock button. Click on the paper emoji, hold down my control button, drag, release, and I will call this my paper button. One more time for our emoji buttons, hold down my control key, click on that and drag to form my last emoji, and this will be my scissors button. Then we have our play again button. So hold down the control key, click and drag, and this will be called play again button. So the next thing we need to do is create actions to handle the button taps. So when they choose a rock, we need to add the action function to handle that. Hold down on the control key, click and drag. And now this needs to be an action. And we will call it rock chosen. Hold down on the control key, drag, release. It's already set to an action, remembering the last thing that we did, and we will call it paper chosen. And finally, hold down on the control key, drag, and this will be called scissors chosen. And one last button, our play again. Hold down on the control key, click and drag. And this will be called play again. Okay, so now we have all of our connections set up. Another way that we can always now for part 3 on page 381, we are going to be working back again in the GameState.swift file that we set up. And I'm going to go ahead and close the view controller file so that we just have the game state file. So the only thing that we currently have in there is our enum, and it's telling us on page 381 that we need to add a method to update the UI based on the game state parameter. So it gives us several things that we should do. The message should do the following things: set the status labels text property to an appropriate message, set a different background color to the main view depending on the state. If the game state is in the start, do the following: reset the computer sign label to the robot emoji, hide the play button, show all of the player's sign buttons. Okay, so we are going to start by adding some computed variables to our enum structure. To set the labels text property. And you can see that it is going to be a string literal. Oops. Status string. So we will define self to have one of these cases. If we're at the start, we want to return, we're just starting the game and we want our label to say rock, paper, scissors. When we have a win game state status, we want to return to that label, you won. If they lose, we want to return, you lose. And of course we're getting this switch must be exhaustive because up here it recognizes that our enum has 4 different cases. So the expectation is that this computed variable will correlate to each one of those cases in our game state enum. If it's a case of draw, we will return it's a draw. And this is our closing bracket for our switch. And this is our closing bracket for our computed variable status. The other thing that it told us to do over on page 381, was to set a different color. So we are going to set up a computed variable for that. So color, we'll call it UI color. Use another switch statement to define our colors for each one of our enums options in our game state. And you'll notice that I'm getting an error message on line 28. It cannot find type UI color in the scope. That's because we haven't pointed to the namespace that contains that UI color. Well, for one thing, I misspelled it, which also doesn't help. But nonetheless, correct or incorrect, they're both going to give us errors, but I need to point where so Swift can find where the UI color are stored, if you can think about it as a different filing cabinet. So to point to where UI color is stored, I'm going to add an import UI kit at the top of my game state Swift file. This we're going to continue to see just like we did above until we account for every case in our enum: start, win, lose, draw. So for case of start, return UI color blue. Okay. Whoa, wild typing. For case win, we'll return UI color green. Case lose, return UI color red. And our last case, draw, return UI color yellow. So we need a closing bracket for my switch statement and a closing bracket for my computed variable. So for the if we go back to page 381, now we have to account for the last instructions that they're giving us, telling us what the game should do if it's in the start state. So I'm going to go back to my file navigator. I'm going to go back to the view controller. and we are going to have to add a function for how to process the UI update. So we are going to add a new method, and this is going to be a function. We are going to add a new method, and we're going to call this update UI. And it's going to receive a whatever our game state is. Will be the variable that's passed in. Status label, we want to set that to our start status. But I'm not pointing to the property. We want to change the status label.text to our status that we just set over here on our game state. So our status, our start status is going to say rock, paper, scissors. And then we're going to have to use another switch statement to define all the different game statuses that we can have. I'm getting good at these switch statements. Maybe. So when the case is start, we're going to take their recommendations. We're going to set our background color to gray. Our sign label, we're going to set as it directs us to the robot emoji. I need to point to the sign label text property. We're going to set that to the robot emoji. So I bring up my emoji picker, Control, Command, Spacebar, and there, whoops. I go to my emoji picker. I go to my emoji picker, Control, Command, Spacebar, and I select the robot. Play. I play again button. I want to set that property is hidden to true. And I'm going to set the properties for rock, paper, and scissors buttons to false. Enable and show all of the players' signed buttons. So rock button is hidden will be false. Paper button is hidden will be false. And scissors button is hidden will be false. And then we need to enable them. So rock button is enabled will be set to true. Oh, paper button is enabled will be set to true. And scissors is enabled will be set to true. So now we will change the background color for each of our other states. We want the view view, that's why I'm not view background color. And there again, this is what we set up. We just did over in our game state. So that's where that information will be pulled from. Oops. Okay. Oh, so I just realized this was showing me that I had some kind of a discrepancy. So that's why I needed to go back over here to my game state, and I can see that I did not spell it correctly. So it didn't understand what that variable was. So as soon as I correct my spelling and in my game state Swift file, I go back over here, then that should be corrected. Do a little editing on my format. And now we have completed that function. There are two places where you should call this method in the code right now, passing in start as an argument in each call. Add a call to the method you just added from the view did load. So update UI, and we want to pass it start. Add a call to the method you've just a call to the method you've just added from the action method linked to the Play Again button. So here is the action link to our Play Again button. Okay. After you implement the code for when the players have chosen a sign, you'll need to call this code to update the UI as well as to create the app's move and decide the outcome of the game. All right, let's go ahead. I'm going to end part 2, and part 3 we will pick up on page 382.